This is the Cardiff Business School podcast, where we explore the power of public value in everything we do. My name is Peter Wells. I'm the Pro-Dean of Public Value here in the school, and I'm also the host of this podcast. My guest today is Dr Iain Long. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
I have to start by saying that Iain, on his website entry, has a statement which still confounds me. He says, Iain is currently Director of the Undergraduate Economic Programmes, responsible for around 23 different degree programme containing modules and around 900 students. This is an extraordinarily bland statement. How do you manage that beast?
As you can imagine, it's incredibly challenging. Really, it just comes down to trying to carve out time not to spend all of your life firefighting. So it would be very, very easy for me to just be very responsive to emails all the time and do nothing else. That could take over my life. But what I've found over the last few years is that if you do that, you never fix the underlying problems that are causing emails to come in. And so I think the way that I've managed to cope is by taking more of a strategic view and starting to think a little bit more long-term about where the programs were going, with a view to making sure that rather than thinking about what I've got to do today, what we've got to do over the next 2 or 3 years to get things going in the direction that we want them to.
Yes, I can see this analytical skill is paying off already. Yeah. And you, just to backtrack a bit, I mean, you went to LSE, the London School of Economics. You're a practicing economist.
I am.
It's famously the dismal science.
Couldn't possibly comment.
What do you like about economics?
So what I like about economics is really, I guess it comes down to my analytical mind that you point out. So I'm really interested in social sciences, but naturally I'm mathematical. Yeah, I studied a lot of maths, physics, these sorts of things growing up, but social questions were the things that really interested me. Mm-hmm. And so economics is where these two things combine. So, one of the jokes that's often made about economists is that they have physics envy. Now, this is made by people who tend not to be too kind to economists, but there's a certain amount of truth in the sense that we use a lot of the same sort of tools that you'll see in physics or engineering, but we apply them to society and social questions. And what that enables us to do sometimes is really to look at things from a slightly different perspective and point out things that other people might have missed. Mm-hmm. So a lot of unintended consequences of policy, really being able to think about things in the round, but also not just being able to say, well, if you introduce this policy, we think this will happen. Economists can say, well, we think something will happen, but this is how much it will happen. And
interesting.
That's the other big advantage that economics has in the policy space. It's all about being able to quantify things, which is what ministers really need in order to make an educated decision.
So this explains to me a bit this idea that you've mentioned in the past in conversation with me of being a sort of an applied microeconomics theorist. Mm-hmm. You shotgun those two things together.
Exactly. So as I say, I'm a mathematician rather than a statistician. And a lot of the work I do is building mathematical models of the economy or parts of the economy, and then saying, okay, well, what happens if we drop a new policy into this environment? How do individuals respond? How do firms respond? How can we use that to try and make some sort of prediction about, well, if we do this, maybe we'll get the effect we want, but then maybe there'll be all these other things that are going on that might not necessarily work out the way we want them to.
Interesting. Yeah. So you've got this applied kind of mindset, mm-hmm. and you're busily engaged in trying to run a very large economics program, mm-hmm. and then along comes public value, and we ask you to take on that challenge of trying to bring public value into what is, a mature, established discipline at undergraduate level. I think to me, this was the hardest task across the whole school, and this is why I'm particularly keen to talk with you today.
Okay, great.
So, what did you do? Where did you start?
So, really, the thing to start with was trying to work out what public value meant for a practicing economist. So a lot of the discussions that you have with other colleagues in the business school is around kind of leadership and kind of making the big decisions that drive us in the right direction, choosing the grand challenges and driving us towards solutions. That's not the role of an economist. So the biggest employer of economists in the country is the Government Economic Service, part of the civil service. So our job is when a minister makes the big decision and says, this is the grand challenge we want to address, Our job is to say, okay, well, if this is the way you want to do it, these are the likely consequences and this is the likely impact of that. So really what I wanted to do was try and build in that kind of understanding from first-year undergraduate level. So economics, traditionally, it's taught in a very abstract way. There's lots of maths, there's lots of statistics. There's not quite as much policy work as there could be. Right. And so what I wanted to do was, yes, get students to engage with ethical questions around economics, and that's very, very important, but also to really give them the practical skills that they could then take into a government role and be effective from day one. Give them the understanding of the grand challenges so that they're willing to kind of put their hand up and say, yes, I think I've got an answer that's well-founded in economics. And, if you look at a lot of the big thinkers in public value, from our very own Calvin Jones through to Mariana Mazzucato or Kate Rayworth, they are economists.
Yes.
But the majority of economists that are working in this kind of space are thinking about, well, what are the policy implications on a day-to-day practical level? And that's what I wanted to bring to the program.
So you've tried to introduce public value into all stages of the undergraduate program, year 1, year 2, year 3. How have you managed to weave it in?
Yeah, so we started by taking the traditional approach to economics, which is kind of covering core microeconomics, macroeconomics, and econometrics, and shifting that all into our first semester of first year. Now, this opened up a lot of space to do more applied work and think about some broader skills. So in our first year, we have a module, Contemporary Economic Issues, which is looking at the grand challenges as outlined by the Business School's public value policy. We also have a professional skills module where students will be engaged in a semester-long group project that's designed to mimic the kind of policy project that they could be given if they were working in government. Now, at each step along that line, we do a deeper dive into the kind of skills, the kind of questions that they need to ask. So being much more critical about the kind of assumptions that they're using, thinking about the ethical implications of these sorts of things. And then from second year onwards, we're starting to think more about how economists evaluate policy. And then by the time they get into final year, they've got a lot of optionality and they can really do really deep dives into particular topics around, say, decent work or economic growth or sustainability or these kind of things. So it's still giving them that rigorous economics training, but it's got a lot more policy focus than perhaps it has done in the past, and certainly, I think, than perhaps some of our competitor institutions have.
What's the kind of response you're getting from students for a course like that?
So the course is launching in 25-26.
Okay.
And we've recently kind of done a big announcement with our students. And the immediate response we've had is, can I take a gap year? And this is our current students. So there's definitely,
they want to come back and do that.
They think it's an absolutely fantastic innovation. And it responds to a lot of the feedback that we've had from them about having more applied work, trying to build in some sense of public value, but in a very economics way that I think is distinct from, say, the way an accountant would view public value or somebody in a management position would view public value.
Yeah, how interesting. So I guess we have to wait and see, but I can see that it speaks to a need, shall we say, a level of demand. But you've also worked in terms of your own research in areas which are equally relevant to public value. And
for sure.
Again, well, you say, oh, sure, but it's not necessarily automatic, you see. And I think this tells me something about your attitude, your approach to work. Mostly it seems to be around the themes of job insecurity and things related to criminality. It's hard to pin it down sometimes.
Yeah, quite.
Where do you see your research history? Where do you think your focus has been?
So I would kind of broadly put it in the sphere of economics of illegality and informality.
Illegality and informality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've done all sorts of different projects using different methodologies. So I think we might want to talk about the stuff I've done on alcohol-fueled violence with colleagues at the Crime and Security Research Institute, but also looking at how unemployment insurance policies are designed to help people who are kind of struggling to make ends meet and are having to turn to the informal sector in order to try and bolster their income. So
this is the policy element that you talked about before. So when you're looking at the effect of policy in this particular realm, an outcome may be not the desired outcome, but nonetheless is the logical outcome.
This is it. So this is kind of where political rhetoric meets hard economics. So the traditional rhetoric around unemployment insurance is they give people the minimum that they need to survive because that gives them the most incentive to get a job. And in a very, very simple framework, maybe that might work. So what my co-authors and I did was we said, okay, what happens when you introduce opportunities for informal work? So people, if you're giving them the minimum possible, then they have the maximum incentive to go out and try and bolster their income. Now, this takes them away from searching for work in the formal sector. Right. And so it could actually lead to, in the long term, more unemployment. So it's getting completely the opposite from what the policy is designed to do. You're trying to get everybody into formal work, but you're pushing them into the informal sector instead.
And of course, you have some experience of the informal sector yourself.
Well, almost. I
think most academics have some background, but what's your story?
So I started off in rural Northumberland and worked for many years while I was studying as a lifeguard and a swimming teacher.
This we have in common.
Yeah.
You have brought us something?
I have indeed. So I brought, and this is something I'm sadly very, very proud of, my swimming teacher polo shirt. It's nearly 20 years old now. It used to be white. It's not quite so white anymore. But the thing that I'm super proud of is it's actually got my name on. And this was a big deal at the time because most of us who were just on temporary work or 0 hours work, we wouldn't get a polo shirt with our name on. So you knew you'd made it when you'd got one of those. But I'd say that experience working with kind of small kids teaching, but also doing kind of the role of a lifeguard, cleaning changing rooms, scrubbing, all of this sort of stuff that goes along with that kind of job, really informed my outlook, both in terms of my teaching and in terms of my research and my interest in these kind of slightly more insecure jobs where you didn't know 1 week to the next how many hours you were going to get because you'd wait for the phone call to come in when the supervisor was trying to fill up the rota for that week.
Yes. And of course, it's become a huge part of our economy now.
Oh, it has. So at the moment, the current estimates suggest that there are roughly the same number of people working in 0 hours contracts as there are unemployed. So if you want to include those people in the unemployed statistics, which we wouldn't, but if you did, you basically double the unemployment rate.
Yes, that's quite a staggering figure, isn't it?
It is. It's over 1 million people.
Over 1 million people in the informal sector, insofar as
0 hours contract sector.
Okay, 0 hours contracts. Insofar as we're able to count them, I suppose.
Indeed.
I mean, there's an overlap here also with some of the areas that other podcasts have touched on. For example, modern slavery, and so there's, of course, it's a step from 0 hours to modern slavery, but nonetheless, there's a kind of continuum, a growing area of our kind of economically active lives that seem to be more peripheral than they were. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say so. So some of the work that I'm looking at the moment is how policies that were designed to improve job security and give people a better standard of living have actually increased potentially some of this more precarious employment as employers try and find new and different ways to balance the risks that they're facing in terms of things like fluctuating demand with the demands of the labour market policy sphere that they're operating within.
Interesting.
And so again, this is all about the kind of the unintended consequences of policy. When you try pulling one lever, what you don't realise is that something over the other side of the engine room is starting to blow a gasket.
Nice analogy, by the way. But how are you able to think about the potential other things that could happen? I mean, this is not as easy as it looks, I suspect.
No, for sure. And this is where the mathematics comes in because that guides you. You build a formal model of whatever aspect of the labour market we're looking at. So in this case, 0 hours contracts. And then we can drop in a policy. And we can say, okay, when we drop this policy in, do we get the effects we want? And also what happens to all of these other things that we're also trying to capture? And having done that, maybe done a computer simulation of that, we can then take it to data to say, does our model really fit with reality? And are we starting to see the same sort of trends that our model would predict?
Wow. So in principle, you're trying to trace a kind of cause and effect pathway.
Indeed.
but focusing very much on, from a public value point of view, tend to be those people within the economy who are most disadvantaged. And of course, this is why it's kind of interesting to us. But tell me a little bit about the Crime and Security Institute. This is across the whole university?
It is. It was set up 4 or 5 years ago as one of the university's big research institutes. Mm-hmm. So the work that I do with colleagues in the business school also links with some colleagues in the dental school. So that the stuff that we have on alcohol-fueled violence was really set up by a guy called Professor Jonathan Shepherd. He was a facial surgeon. And my understanding is every Saturday morning he'd get a phone call saying, well, we've got so many people who've been hit in the face with a glass. Can you come in and start stitching them up, please?
Right.
And so that led to his interest in trying to understand what it was about alcohol that was causing these sorts of violent behaviours. And through that, he brought in some economists to look at data relating to alcohol prices and how that affected a number of admissions to accident and emergency.
Normally, it's not something you would think, I must get an economist to help me answer this.
No, quite. But if you want to come up with a solid evidence base, mm-hmm. I mean, this is where the statistical skills of an economist really can come into play.
Right.
So we were able to get data from A&E departments across mm-hmm. the country. We were able to look at the price of alcohol, and then we were able to control for lots of different factors like the weather, the seasons, average ages, whether it's a city or rural area, all of these sorts of things, and really try and refine whether there is this link between, say, a fall in the price of alcohol mm-hmm. and an increase in violence.
And is there?
Yes.
Very straightforward answer for an economist.
Well, I could say, on the one hand, on the other, but so the evidence seems to suggest that there is a link.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And will you be able to pursue this sort of research area in the future?
Certainly. So the work that I've done is using kind of very cutting-edge methodologies around experimental economics and trying to understand, it almost veers into psychology, trying to understand what it is about alcohol consumption that could make people behave more violently. So the work that we've done to date has been doing some psychological experiments with people who've been either in a bar environment or elsewhere. And what we're finding is that actually it's not just the amount that they drink that's important, it's where they're drinking. So it's the bar environment that...
There's a more collective behaviour going on.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so the next step of that research is really to say, okay, what is it about the environment? Because once we know what it is about the environment, we can start coming up with policy interventions. Mm-hmm. Is it the case that we need to increase the temperature or decrease the temperature? Do we need to change the light slightly? Would any of these sorts of things at the margin have any kind of effect on the number of people rocking up at A&E on a Friday night and Saturday morning?
Back to policy again.
So,
yes, I think this has been it's been a really interesting demonstration of the practical value of what you might call mainstream economics. And it's properly theorized, it has a solid methodology, but it's not abstract. It's absolutely looking to solve those grand challenges that we face today.
Indeed.
Thank you, Iain. This has been the Cardiff Business School podcast, looking at the power of public value in everything we do. Today, my guest has been Dr. Iain Long, who's been talking about 2 significant areas of work that he's been involved in. On the one hand, he's been telling us about how he's tried and indeed succeeded in developing public value into the mainstream undergraduate program in economics. And on the other side, he's been talking about his own research, which is fueled by an interest in how to apply core microeconomic theories and robust methodologies to help solve complex societal problems. Thank you very much.